This is Find Your Dream Job, the podcast that helps you get hired, have the career you want, and make a difference in life. I'm Mac Pritchard, your host and publisher of Mac's List. Our show is brought to you by Mac's List and by our book, Land Your Dream Job in Portland and Beyond. To learn more about the book and the updated edition that we're publishing in February, visit maxlist.org/ebook. Thanks for joining us today. Now, when you hear the phrase technology sector, you probably think of multi-billion-dollar companies like Google, Apple, or Amazon. But you don't have to be in Silicon Valley or Seattle to work in tech. It's no wonder many people move to these places to work for technology companies, however. The sector grows faster than the rest of the economy, and the jobs pay above-average salaries. But there are opportunities across the globe, not just in California or Washington State. And it's a field not just for startup founders, engineers, or coders. This week on Find Your Dream Job, we're talking about tech jobs. Ben Forstag has an online site you can use to find the highest paying jobs in the sector. And Cecilia Bianco has answers for what you need to do when any employer Googles you. And finally, I'll talk to an engineer who helps people find tech jobs in Silicon Valley and elsewhere. First, though, let's start as we do every week by checking in with the Mac's List team. Ben, Cecilia, how are you two doing?
I'm doing great.
Doing really good, Mac.
Good. It's great to have you both here in the studio. Now, tech jobs. Before you all came here, did either one of you work in the technology sector?
Yeah, I actually had an internship at a startup in college. It was called KnowUO, and it was a database for everything going on at the university, restaurants, bars, and what to do on the weekend. So it was an interesting experience.
Okay, good. How about you, Ben?
When I was in college, I was an intern at CompuWare in Detroit. They are a software services company. I was in their marketing department, so I wouldn't call it a tech job per se, but it was where I first learned how to use HTML, which has been a great skill for me.
Oh, good. Well, I have not worked in the tech sector, though I had the good fortune way back in the early 80s when IBM first introduced their PCs to work at a nonprofit that actually bought them. And so that was, in those days, bleeding edge technology. And I learned all about floppy disks and WordStar 3.0. So, well, speaking of discovery, let's turn to Ben, who is out there every week looking for resources that you, our listeners, can use. And Ben, what have you learned for us this week related to technology?
So, Max, since today we're talking about technology, I wanted to share two different blogs that I found, or specifically blog posts around technology. The first one comes from Glassdoor.com, which is a resource we talked about last week. But this comes from their blog, which is around all kinds of workforce issues. And this blog is the 25 highest paying jobs in demand.
Okay.
And it's a list of the highest paying jobs that there's a huge demand for, as you would guess. The key takeaway from this blog post is that almost half of the jobs listed were in the tech sector. And I wrote out the top tech jobs there. They are software architect, software development manager, solutions architect, analytics manager, IT manager, data scientist, security engineer, hardware engineer, database administrator, and software engineer. I don't know what most of the jobs do, I will admit, but these are all jobs where the average salary is well over $100,000 a year. So, there's clearly a lot of money and opportunity in the tech sector. And 30 years ago, our parents or grandparents might have been urging us to go be doctors or lawyers because they thought that's where we were going to make a lot of money and take care of them in their old age. Nowadays, parents are probably urging their kids to go off to Silicon Valley and become software engineers and analytics managers because that's where all the money's at.
Okay. Well, that's an impressive list. I know we'll include that in the show notes, too.
Yeah, I'll include this specific URL to this blog post in the show notes. The key, I think, here is knowing the coding languages that are most in demand if you want to get into the tech sector. So I did a little bit of Googling, and what I found were the most in demand languages were SQL, Java, JavaScript, C#, C++, Python, Ruby on Rails, and iOS Swift. Cecilia, I saw you shaking your head when I read that list. Do you know any of these coding languages?
No, I don't, but I did recently discover that Mac's List runs on SQL, so while I have no idea how to run it or anything about it, I know what it's called.
You know we've got it.
Yeah.
How about you, Mac?
I'm doomed because I don't recognize any of these languages. I have some Spanish, but I don't think that's going to cut it.
Well, 10 years ago, I thought I was really advanced because I know HTML. No, I don't know any of these either, so I'm doomed as well. Here's the good news for all of us in this room and all of our listeners. You can learn almost all of these languages online, in your home, in your pajamas, and often for free. Which brings me to my next blog resource for the week, which is a blog post on a website called hongkiat.com. That's HONGKIAT.com. I don't know where these names come from, but the blog is the top 10 websites to learn coding interactively online. So there are a lot of different websites out there where you can take courses, where you can learn just about any one of these languages and other tech skills. Some of these websites you may have heard of before, Code Academy, Code Tree, Treehouse, or Khan Academy. Khan Academy I know has been making the news a lot recently because they teach just about any subject you want to learn. And the really cool thing about this is most of these sites offer at least some free training. You can scale up and pay for extras, but the baseline on most of them is free. The one reason I really like this hongkiat.com blog post is it gives a good summary of what each site teaches in terms of what languages you can learn, price point at what you can get for free and what you have to pay for, the teaching methodology, and the difficulty level for each online course. They have a matrix at the bottom of the blog post that displays all of this information in a really easy and intuitive way. So I would suggest you check out this blog post. It's, again, the top 10 websites to learn coding interactively online, and I will have the URL in our show notes.
Great. I know that our listeners will look forward to seeing that. Now, thanks, Ben. And if you have a suggestion for Ben for a resource you think would be valuable to our listeners, write him. His email address is ben@maxlist.org. Now, let's turn to you, our listeners. Cecilia, our community manager, is here to answer one of your questions. So, Cecilia, what are you hearing this week from our listeners?
Yeah, this week our question is, I have an upcoming interview and I'm curious how I should prepare my online profiles. What are employers looking for when they Google my name? So I think they're looking for a few different things, but the main reason an employer is Googling you is to check your credibility. So they want to see what pops up when your name's Googled. Are you who you say you are? And do your online profiles align with what you've said about yourself thus far in your cover letter, resume, and any other correspondence you've had with them? So especially if you're applying for a tech job, this is important because you want to make sure what's popping up in a Google search, that whatever comes up shows your credibility in your field. So are you a part of online tech groups, online communities that are having conversations around the technology sector? And are you tech savvy and active online and social media and with tech writing? So firstly, I think to prepare, you should start by Googling yourself and seeing what pops up. So from there, you can focus on what you need to improve. Mac and Ben, I know I've Googled my own name before. Have you Googled yours?
I have, and unfortunately or fortunately, I've got a last name that is not very common, and it's probably the case that I know or am immediately related to any Forstag out there in the world. If you're a Forstag and you don't know who I am, please give me a call so we can chat.
Okay.
So I have Googled myself, and I get the usual mishmash of old posts that I've written for MaxList or other websites, my social media profiles, press releases I've written for other organizations. I would like to make one quick addendum to your suggestion, though. When you Google yourself, I think it really helps if you're in blind mode or user mode on your browser, because Google remembers a lot of your search history, and that doesn't show you what everyone else out in the world is looking for or finds when they type in your name. So if you use, I think it's called guest mode in Chrome or blind mode in other.
I think it might be called incognito.
Incognito mode in Chrome. That kind of cleans the slate and shows you what everyone else in the world sees when they Google your name. It's a good way to see what other folks see.
Yeah.
I have Googled myself, and it is a good practice because you want to see what others will see about you. And I made a deliberate effort some years ago to make sure I filled out online profiles for common sites like LinkedIn, Yelp, Facebook, and those are the ones that pop up.
Yeah, so I saw a lot of the same stuff when I Googled myself. Past work, past blog posts, and all my online profiles came up, which I think is a good thing. So after you Google yourself, you want to figure out where you can improve what's popping up on Google. So the first and most important thing to focus on is LinkedIn, because you can get the most value out of an employer looking at your LinkedIn profile, and it's really common for them to want to see that. So if your LinkedIn profile isn't popping up, what you want to do is change the URL on your LinkedIn profile to include your full name, and that way it'll make you a little bit more searchable. And that's pretty easy to do. You just hit edit profile and you'll see it pop up so you can make a change to that long URL. So LinkedIn is very important to make sure that's popping up, and it's good to have your profile set up and ready to go for an employer to see before you even apply for the job, because they might Google you once they see right when they see your resume. So you want to be prepared for that. And then once LinkedIn's taken care of, you want to see what other social media accounts of yours are popping up, if they are, and you want to make sure you don't have anything on those accounts that you don't want an employer to see. So if you're using Twitter and Facebook, you want to make sure your privacy filters are set to only show things to strangers that you want them to see. And they can be great tools to support your credibility, because if you're showing on all your social media platforms that your interests and passions and things you like to talk about are the same in what you've said in your job application, that demonstrates that you're a credible applicant and they're going to trust you more. So you want to make sure those are all cleaned up before you apply. And if you don't have time to clean them up before applying, just make sure your privacy filters are locked tight with just what you want them to see. So Mac, we've talked about this before. I know you've Googled past job applicants. What were you looking for when you did that?
Two things. One, I wanted to see that track record of accomplishment or experience in the area that for a job that they were applying for. And I think you're making a really important point, Cecilia, about the importance of showing rather than telling, because people can say that they're interested in a topic or they have experience in an area. But if you go online and you see that they've actually done work and there are examples of that work, that's very powerful. And then the second thing I'm looking for is what clients and colleagues will see when they Google that person, because if I do hire that candidate as an employer, they're going to become part of the team, and the image that they're projecting to the world becomes part of our company's brand. And I want to make sure that that aligns with the values and the mission of our firm.
Yeah, that's definitely really important. So a tip on that, one last tip, the more profiles you're active on and feel comfortable with an employer seeing, the better, because this gives you the most control over what's going to pop up in that Google search and what they're going to see when they Google you. So overall, the easiest way to control what an employer will see if they Google you is to Google yourself and then determine where you can improve.
Good. Well, thank you, Cecilia. That's excellent advice. If you have a question for Cecilia, please email her, and her email address is cecilia@maxlist.org. These segments by Ben and Cecilia are sponsored by the 2016 edition of Land Your Dream Job in Portland and Beyond. We're making the complete Max List guide even better by adding new content and making the book available on multiple e-reader platforms. In February of next year, we'll launch the revised version of the book, and you'll be able to access Land Your Dream Job in Portland and Beyond on Kindle, Nook, iPad, and other digital devices. You'll also be able to get, for the first time, a paperback edition. Whatever the format, our goal is the same, to give you the tools and tips you need to get meaningful work. For more information, visit maxlist.org/ebook and sign up for our ebook newsletter. We'll be sending you publication updates and share exclusive book content and provide you with special presale prices. Well, let's turn to our expert guest this week, and that is Albert Chen, who is a high-tech digital marketing and product marketing manager. He's originally from Silicon Valley, and he now works in Orange County, California. He's also the founder of Albert's List, a Facebook jobs community with more than 10,000 members that includes recruiters, hiring managers, job seekers, and more. Through the use of social media, Albert has helped fellow group members find work at companies like eBay, Google, and GoPro. Albert, thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me on. I really appreciate the time.
Yeah, it's a pleasure to have you on the show. Well, let's talk about tech jobs. I think there's
Yeah.
when people think about technology, they think these jobs are in Silicon Valley. They're for coders. They're engineers. If you don't have a degree in electrical engineering, you're out of luck. What's been your experience?
Well, my experience is that when you look at the entire technology and high-tech ecosystem for what's out there, that there's actually a lot of opportunities available even for people who aren't engineers. I was out at the Golden State Warriors basketball game on Sunday, and I ran into somebody who was a designer. So user interaction designing, UI, UX, that kind of thing, which is a really hot field right now in the area of high tech, because you have a lot of people who need to design their websites, their web applications, their mobile applications. And when I asked her what her background was, she said that she was somebody who had gotten a degree in counseling psychology with an emphasis on education. I've seen, similar stories where people who have psychology backgrounds also get jobs where they're in project management, PMP degrees,
Mm-hmm.
or PMP roles, where they're working on and with engineers on getting a lot of products to market. And, there's a lot of different areas.
Yeah.
Yes.
Well, let's pause there for a moment, Albert. Because I can imagine our
Mm-hmm.
listeners thinking, okay, I picked up my BA in psychology. Then how do I
Mm-hmm.
make the leap into design work and doing user experience testing? And how do people make that journey?
Yeah, so I think the journey is made where you think about a product as just an end user, right? Many of us have smartphones today, and we no doubt use a bunch of different applications, whether it's on our phone, on the web. We're all like Facebook users, Twitter users, Uber users, things like that, where we're using all these different apps. And the way where we can apply a humanities degree into a technology job is by applying our very own experience. Obviously, there's a little bit of knowledge in needing to know like how some of this technology works, and domain knowledge will always set you apart. But because we're all the end user of so many different types of technology today, we can always have the power and the ability to share these with the technology teams that we work with and take those ideas into fruition into a product.
Okay, so technology matters, but so does human experience, and understanding human
Exactly.
behavior is always a marketable skill in technology.
Yeah, yeah.
Great.
Yeah, because right now you see a lot of technology that's out there on the market, and there's a lot of prospective users. But it takes really a keen human eye to be able to look in between, where you have the ability to use that technology, the solution, to be able to really get users to come in, use the product, and stay using the product.
Okay, and for people who don't have psychology degrees, I know there are a lot of
Mm-hmm.
other opportunities in technology. Could you talk a little bit about that and the kinds of background and skills that help people thrive in the sector outside of engineering?
Yeah, so I've seen people who have, say, English degrees get jobs where they're doing things like technical writing. They're marketing specialists where they focus on writing collateral or doing blogging content for a lot of technology companies that realize that they need to find a way to reach a broader audience. There are folks who can go into technology sales if you're willing and if you're able to speak the language and also use your charisma in being able to sell technology products to others. That works as well. And so there's everything along the lines of the post-engineering process, right? Because once you create a product, you have to find a way to sell it.
Right.
And selling the product includes everyone from product marketers to sales folks to people who manage social communities to people who do the accounting finance stuff in high tech and really everything in between.
So how do you see people break into that world, Albert? Whether it's after they've graduated from college or perhaps they're mid-career and they have experience in another field, but they want to break into technology. What do people who stand out, who are successful at that, do?
I think understanding the importance of a particular domain is important to start out with. I think knowing what and why the technology is important is something that people are always looking for, right? Because even though we live in such a technologically connected world, a lot of people are great at using the technology, but they don't understand why the technology is important from a business perspective.
Albert, when we're talking about the
Mhm.
domain, explain that for our listeners.
Yeah, so a domain would be a technology area. So, for
Okay.
example, one that I'll use is cloud computing, which is where I work in. You can do
Okay.
online.
So there's a lot of opportunity there, and it's important to
Hmm.
know the field that you want to focus on. What about training? If you want to break into technology, there are code academies out there, online training schools. How helpful can those be to people who want to work as programmers, particularly those who didn't have that training in college and may want to make a career switch?
I think it's an interesting way to go about switching from one career into another. And I think what really, and I've spoken to people who have taken these courses and people who are kind of like naturally interested in programming and they see people in these courses. I've seen the example where these types of courses can really be beneficial for somebody who is interested in coding. So one of my friends from college decided to go and take one of these 12-week bootcamp courses, and now he leads a technical team at a startup out in Santa Barbara. And so that's an example of where it is successful. Another one of my friends took one of these courses as well, and now she has transitioned from an account management sales role into a product management role for a company out in Boston, Massachusetts. And so have there been successes? Absolutely. And I think on the other hand, I've spoken to programmers as well who look at this type of audience and they question whether they really get a lot of effective training out of it. Because on one hand, while you do know how to code, your ability to be creative within this coding knowledge is somewhat limited because you're working from a very limited perspective where maybe understanding coding isn't necessarily a natural forte of yours. And so this goes back, I think, to the original point where within technology and the technology sector, there is not necessarily a need to just become a programmer, and that's just technology in its whole. As we've discussed throughout this podcast, you can do a little bit if you have the skills to be able to write. You can be a marketer. You can be a technical writer. If you're a person who can talk to people and do a very good job of that, you can be a salesperson. You can be an account executive. You can be a business development individual within any of the companies that work in tech out there. If you have a degree in, say, accounting or finance, you can go work in sort of from a money perspective in many of these different companies, and you can do very well for yourself.
Okay.
And so, programming doesn't have to be the end all be all.
Okay.
However, there are a lot of different resources out there for people who want to pursue that path.
So, when does it make sense for people to get training in programming? If they want to be a programmer, or can that be an asset if they want to be a project manager or work in marketing and sales or communications and tech?
I certainly think that being technical is very helpful, especially in an area where you might interface with a lot of engineers. So if you are a web marketing individual and you want to launch a product, being able to talk about the interactive features of a website may help a lot. Being able to talk about how something can be marketed as a product marketer when you're interfacing with your social media manager who may know how to code can be really helpful as well.
Okay.
And so a lot of the jobs these days are kind of they're merging together. So your technical writer may need to know how code works and write about how that works from
Okay.
purely a writing perspective.
All right. So coding can help, and
Definitely.
other skills matter a lot too. When
Yes.
if someone is thinking about getting training in coding, and you mentioned your two colleagues, your two friends who had a positive experience, what advice do you have for people who are shopping around for either an online course or a boot camp or a code academy? What should they look for?
So for the boot camps that exist in 8 to 12-week increments, a lot of them have interesting payment plans where either you give them the $15,000 to start and they put you through that process, or there are ones that take a portion of your salary when you start. So that's one pricing model that exists out there. Another model out there that exists are the massive open online courses, the MOOCs that exist. So you can go to websites like Coursera or Code Academy or Udemy.com, and you can pay for anywhere from $30 to $200 to $300 course where you can do self-directed learning on coding. And I think when you're doing the coding learning process, it's always important to have a project in mind that you're doing. If you're just learning to code to learn how to code, you don't really get much out of it. And so if there's a website that you'd like to make or a business that you have that you'd like to improve upon and develop a web application or a mobile application, I believe that's usually the best way to take and the best course of action to approach with when it comes to learning how to code and gaining technical knowledge.
Okay, so have a project that engages you and actually produces a result. And then stepping back to shopping for a course, you mentioned 3 different options, and they have different price points, obviously. But
Yes.
what should people, are there any warning signs that people should look out for when they're considering signing up with one of these boot camps or an online course?
I definitely think there's a lot of financial consideration. So for example, there are some of these coding academies that have popped up in the last couple of years that have already seen their doors close. And so if you're learning how to code and you go to one of these coding academies that ends up closing after you leave, you maybe know better than where you began. So I think name recognition counts a little bit. I think understanding the practical outcomes of what you're learning is also important as well. So if you're going in and you know you want to do front-end web development, knowing the right types of languages that you're going to be taught is a very important first step.
Okay.
So
All right.
that's one thing as well. And then looking at reviews from students who have attended in the past
Okay.
and seeing where they've landed
Okay.
and going with that as well.
So look for companies that have a track record, have good reviews, and
Yep.
can talk about their outcomes and how they've helped students.
And it also doesn't hurt. So like if you do want to go on Coursera or Udemy and you find yourself a $15 course that teaches you how to code, I mean, you can't really lose with that.
Okay.
Having a little bit of extra knowledge never hurts.
Okay. Well, let's move on. In our earlier conversation before this interview, what struck me when we were talking about how people find tech jobs, you brought up a lot of techniques that I hear about any job search. One point you made that stuck with me was that networking still matters. Can you talk more about that and how networking can make a difference in getting a tech job?
Yeah, networking can make a difference because you put yourself in front of a live person, right? If you email people, they have the option to ignore you. If you call people, they have the option to never return your voicemail. But putting yourself in front of another individual and putting your best foot forward is always a plus because humans respond very well when they see somebody that impresses them. And so going out there and giving out your business cards in a reasonable method, obviously, and immersing yourself in front of a lot of people who speak tech, perhaps even a lot better than you do, is really a great way to start. And if you're in a major metropolitan area around the country, there are quite a few actually events that one can attend on a bi-monthly basis where they can meet up with people who work in technology.
Okay. And ours is a national audience. I know you're in California, but are there groups that you see that operate across the country that our listeners might want to check out?
Yeah, so one major one that I've gotten to know a little bit here in my time in Orange County is called Workbridge Associates. And they host an event in all major cities across the country called Tech in Motion. And Tech in Motion is a monthly networking event. Sometimes they have content, sometimes they don't, where various technology professionals in technology marketing, people who program, all get together to share insights, exchange business cards, and get to know each other.
Okay.
And so I think just from my understanding, they've got people in Seattle, Portland, the Bay Area, LA and Orange County, Chicago, Tampa Bay, New York City, Austin, Texas, and so many more.
Okay, excellent tip. We'll be sure to include that in the show notes. And we're coming to the end of our interview, Albert. What else would you like to share with our listeners?
Yeah. So I'd like to invite any of your listeners to look at joining Albert's List. So we, as you've mentioned, are sort of that marketplace where we bring together job seekers, recruiters, and numerous opportunities, kind of like what you do with Max List. And so we have a main California group that you can find under Albert's Job Listings and Referrals. But we also have groups that cover Seattle, Austin, Chicago, and New York City. And so we invite you to join. You can go to our main Facebook group at bit.ly/findyournextjob. That's bit.ly/findyournextjob, all one word. And you can also visit us online at albertslist.org. We currently just have a sign-up page for our email list, and we send out emails every 2 to 3 weeks, which include everything from an update on the jobs report that the U.S. Labor Department sends out every month to highlights of jobs that have been posted in our group to upcoming live networking events, mainly available in the San Francisco Bay Area, where you can meet other professionals and get referred and just get to know the people in your community.
Great. We'll be sure to include both of those links in the show notes. And Albert, thanks so much for joining us this week.
Definitely. Thank you again for having me.
Great. We're back with Ben and Cecilia. Now, what did you two think about the conversation with Albert? What were some of the most important points you heard him make?
I really liked what he had to say about applying for a tech job just with experience in human behavior and human experience and what a user experiences on a website. I think that's a really good way it's good to have that in your mind going into an interview at a tech job, because I think it can be a lot more valuable than I ever thought it was from what he said.
Yeah, I think you're right. It's not working in the technology sector isn't just about coding, and the experiences and values that can serve you in one field, whether it's marketing, sales, project management, human resources, are also valuable in the technology sector. Mm-hmm. What about you, Ben?
Well, I think Albert went back to one of the golden rules of job searching, which is networking, and how important it is to network within the field that you're interested in exploring. I like the way he put it, where when you show up at a networking event, it's really hard for people to ignore you. And so it's an opportunity for you to present yourself in a positive light in front of people who matter and decision makers at companies.
Yeah, I agree. And it doesn't matter what the sector might be, human connection still matters. And people always will tend to hire people they know or people who are recommended to them by people they trust. Well, thank you both, and thank you, our listeners, for listening. We'll be back next week with more tools and tips you can use to find your dream job. In the meantime, visit us at maxlist.org, where you can sign up for our free newsletter with more than 100 new jobs every week. And if you like what you hear on our show, you can help us by leaving a review and rating at iTunes. This helps others discover our show and helps us help more job seekers. Thanks for listening.